So, Princess Anne quietly struck Camilla from the sovereign's parade guest list this week. And here's the part that actually matters. It wasn't the removal that stunned people. It was that nobody undid it. There was no quiet reversal the next morning. No convenient scheduling clash offered up to smooth it over. And Charles, reportedly, never stepped in to overrule his sister. That's exactly where this gets fascinating, because we're not talking about who sits next to whom at Sunday lunch. We're talking about one of those ceremonial occasions where your position, your placement, and whether your name even appears on the page, broadcasts a message that everyone in that world reads instantly. And from what we're hearing, the message this time landed like a slammed door. Now, let's unpack what reportedly took place. Interestingly, the palace didn't learn about any of this through some grand declaration. They learned it through paperwork. The revised list circulated, and Camilla's name had simply vanished from it. Not relocated to a lesser row, not rescheduled for a separate arrival, not nudged toward a quieter corner. Gone. And when that page reportedly reached Camilla's hands, she didn't erupt in front of the staff or dissolve into some dramatic scene. She went silent. She scanned the formal arrangement once, then again, hunting for the spot where her name belonged. And there was nothing there but blank space. In a royal household, that kind of quiet carries more weight than any shouting match, because it means everyone in the room grasped the significance of what they were looking at before a single word was spoken. Charles, from what sources suggest, was standing near a window when the full weight of it settled over him. And by those accounts, he wore the expression of a man who'd sensed bad news arriving long before anyone found the courage to say it aloud. He understood at once that this wasn't a clerical slip from someone in the planning office. Anne doesn't make careless edits. She doesn't move on impulse. She's lived inside that machinery for decades, and she knows precisely what every ceremonial choice signals. So when her office pushed through a revision that erased the Queen Consort from a major military occasion, Charles reportedly knew a single phone call wouldn't fix it. This was deliberate, and the manner of it, clean, absolute. Never flagged as provisional, never dressed up as an adjustment, made one thing plain. Anne, allegedly, had left no door open for negotiation. Here's what makes the sovereign's parade matter far more than a casual viewer might guess. It's a formal military ceremony where royal presence broadcasts unity, loyalty, and the authority of the crown itself. Everyone positioned near the center helps shape the story of who is trusted close to the monarchy. So when Camilla's name disappeared, it wasn't merely a personal slight. Reportedly, it read as a public statement about her standing, and Anne knew exactly what that signature meant when she approved it. The senior aide who delivered the confirmation, from what we're hearing, didn't soften a syllable. It wasn't explained away as illness, or scheduling strain, or some wish for a slimmer guest list. The amendment had come straight from Anne, and the aide's hushed delivery reportedly made the truth sit heavier in that room. Charles apparently began to ask whether he could approve the final draft, but the question died somewhere before it reached anyone. Nobody scrambled to respond because nobody needed to. Anne's authority had already threaded itself through the official order with quiet precision. And the detail that reportedly disturbed Camilla most wasn't the removal at all. It was how it had been written. It stood on the page as a direct correction to the arrangement, and its permanence was impossible to mistake. When Camilla finally lowered that page, the silence around her, by these accounts, became almost unbearable. Charles looked from the document to the faces near him, visibly torn between the husband who wanted to fight for his wife and the monarch who recognized that Anne's grip on ceremonial discipline wasn't something he could override without paying for it. And that's the fracture at the heart of all this. Charles has spent years defending Camilla's place beside him, turning a private devotion into public duty, working to normalize her role after all the history and all the controversy. But this one amendment struck at the exact thing he'd been protecting. His wife hadn't been asked to accept a humbler seat. She hadn't been asked to arrive separately. She'd been removed outright. And everyone close to the crown understood what that meant. This was never only about a parade. It was about who has the right to stand near the crown once trust turns fragile. Now, to understand why Anne moved with such finality, you have to rewind to what happened before that list was ever touched. Every palace rupture has an origin point, and this one reportedly began behind closed doors during a quiet rehearsal briefing for the very same parade. According to those present, Camilla reached in that room for a kind of influence she was never meant to hold. And what lingered afterward wasn't noise. It was silence. Not because anyone raised their voice. From what we're hearing, no one did. But because something in that briefing crossed a line Anne apparently decided could never be crossed back. Charles had reportedly walked into that briefing expecting the ordinary, a controlled session where details get polished and everyone moves along. But the atmosphere shifted the moment Camilla began pressing for her role near the royal party to be strengthened. She argued, by these accounts, that her position beside Charles should be visibly reinforced, rather than softened or tucked behind cautious wording. And honestly, the human impulse there isn't hard to understand. The Queen Consort had weathered years of public judgment, years of comparison, years of feeling she had to keep proving she belonged in that room. Her request reportedly carried the weight of someone exhausted by justifying her own presence. But the harder she pushed, the further Anne withdrew into silence. And that restraint, from what we're hearing, made the room tenser than any outburst could have. Anne, according to those accounts, finally set her pen down, slow and deliberate, and everyone understood the discussion had gone somewhere it shouldn't. She reportedly told Camilla the parade was not a personal restoration platform, that protocol couldn't be bent to soothe private insecurity, and that phrasing does an enormous amount of work. Private insecurity isn't diplomatic language. It's blunt. It reframes a ceremonial disagreement into something intensely personal, and it signals that Anne viewed the request not as a legitimate conversation about placement, but as an attempt to use a state occasion to treat a private wound. Charles, by these accounts, looked toward his sister, then toward his wife, trapped between loyalty and duty, aware that both women believed they were defending the crown in wholly opposite ways. Camilla reportedly didn't retreat. She suggested Anne's arrangement felt unnecessarily severe, and that was the trigger everyone would later remember. Anne closed the folder at once. No speech followed. No compromise was offered. The briefing ended in the kind of calm that feels more final than fury ever could. Charles understood then that his sister had reached a decision inside herself before anyone else dared name it. She carried that folder out under her arm, and the room stayed heavy behind her. Days later, from what we're hearing, that same folder would return with one name missing and no apology attached. Once that rehearsal door closed, the confrontation was only waiting for the right hallway. And it arrived. Not in a throne room, not before cameras, not beneath chandeliers arranged for state drama. It came in a corridor, where footsteps travel faster than secrets, and faces betray what titles try to conceal. Camilla wanted an explanation. Anne had already given one. Charles stood between them, reportedly realizing too late that silence could no longer shield anyone. Camilla, by these accounts, moved toward Anne with the amended list still in her hand, and from the descriptions circulating, that single page seemed heavier than any jewel she'd ever worn. The removal had already bruised her pride. Now it demanded a voice. She reportedly asked whether humiliation had become official policy, and the words cut through the corridor with the force of someone who'd swallowed judgment for far too long. Because again, this was never just about missing a ceremony. The sovereign's parade is one of those royal moments where attendance means something beyond mere presence. It tells the household, the military, and the watching public who remains trusted close to the crown. So the removal wasn't an inconvenience. It was a verdict. Charles stepped in before the exchange could harden past repair. He followed Camilla because he knew, from what we're hearing, that damage spreads fast when staff catch anger moving through private walls. The king wanted calm. He wanted room to soften what Anne had done, to reshape an open wound into a misunderstanding, to protect his wife without appearing to challenge his sister. But Anne, reportedly, gave him no such path. She stood still, her voice low and exact, and told Camilla that public ceremony could not be used to repair private standing. Camilla didn't take that quietly. She looked from Anne to Charles, searching for loyalty and finding hesitation instead. The Queen Consort had fought for years to be seen as part of the monarchy's future rather than its difficult past. And now the very system she'd worked to enter seemed to be closing around her. Anne's answer, by these accounts, made the pain sharper precisely because it wasn't emotional. It was controlled. It sounded less like anger and more like a ruling. Charles reportedly tried again to interrupt, but Anne turned toward him with the calm force of someone already past the point of retreat. She told him the crown could not afford another appearance clouded by internal tension. That phrase reportedly struck him because it carried more than complaint. It carried warning. She was saying that Camilla's presence at the parade wouldn't project unity. It would drag attention toward division, toward whispers, toward every unresolved fracture the palace had tried to bury beneath polished ceremony. Then Camilla's voice changed. She asked whether Charles had agreed to it. And that question, from what we're hearing, was more dangerous than any accusation, because it demanded a choice: husband or king, defender or guardian of order. Charles reportedly opened his mouth, but the pause came first, and that pause became the answer nobody wanted to hear. Camilla understood it instantly. So did Anne. The silence betrayed him before his words could rescue him. Anne didn't press further. She didn't need to. The decision had already done its work, and the corridor had exposed what the guest list only hinted at. When she walked away, she left Charles facing Camilla alone, the space between them thick with everything neither could say. He hadn't removed her name, but he'd failed to restore it. She hadn't lost a seat, exactly. She'd lost certainty. Now, here's what makes Anne's authority in all this so hard to challenge. It didn't come only from a few sharp sentences in a corridor. It came from a deeper power that Camilla, reportedly, underestimated. The palace had always known Anne could be firm, but this moment revealed something more formidable than temperament. She knows the rules. She understands the machinery. She can move through the ancient architecture of ceremony with a confidence that makes resistance look reckless. Camilla challenged the guest list, and was answered with the full weight of the institution itself. Charles didn't need anyone to explain why his sister's move carried such force, yet he still read the file as though the pages might yield a gentler truth. A senior courtier reportedly stood nearby, watching the king's expression slide from irritation into something heavier, something closer to reluctant understanding. Anne's influence hadn't materialized overnight. It came from decades of service, discipline, and a kind of ceremonial fluency no palace advisor could manufacture. She understands royal order because she has lived inside it, guarded it, and watched what happens when personal desire tries to bend it. And the guest list, remember, is more than a record of attendance. It's a controlled statement of who belongs near the ceremonial heart of the monarchy. A formal arrangement telling the household, the military, and the public who stands inside the circle of trust. Charles knew that, and the knowledge made the file harder to challenge. If he reversed Anne too quickly, he wouldn't simply restore Camilla. He'd expose a fracture in the very system meant to project unity. A private wound would become a public contradiction. Here's the detail that reportedly unsettled him most, though. Anne's amendment was colder than he'd expected. She hadn't merely deleted a name and left a gap. By these accounts, she'd reorganized the surrounding positions, tightened the order, and reshaped the whole arrangement so the removal looked deliberate, structured, and final. That precision disturbed him more than anger would have. Anger can be calmed. Precision has to be answered. And the king understood, with growing discomfort, that his sister had prepared for resistance before anyone dared offer any. He reportedly found a private note attached to the file, stopped reading for a moment, then returned to the line that mattered most. The parade, Anne had written, must proceed without personal dispute, affecting sovereign representation. On the surface, no insult. Yet it landed like a verdict. She wasn't accusing Camilla openly. She was doing something more powerful. She was defining the danger and placing duty above sympathy, order above comfort, ceremony above one woman's need to be publicly reassured. Camilla, reportedly, had already felt the consequence before Charles even finished the final page. She knew she'd been outmaneuvered before the week's ceremony began. She'd expected a dispute, perhaps a private apology. But Anne had built the decision into the official structure itself. Charles set the file down without a word, and in that silence, everyone understood the palace machinery had chosen stability over emotion. And once that machinery accepted Anne's decision, the fallout moved out of private rooms and into every relationship around the crown. But fallout rarely begins with shouting. Sometimes it begins with a door that doesn't open, a call that isn't returned, a chair quietly lifted from a room where someone expected to sit. For Camilla, the first sign of the new reality arrived with brutal simplicity. The preparations carried on without her, and nobody rushed to correct it. She reportedly entered the planning room expecting the usual rhythm to bend back around her. There should have been a schedule pack waiting, a folder marked with her attendance notes, a place set for the Queen Consort, as if the earlier tension had been nothing more than a passing storm. Instead, the table had already moved on. Preparations were now running under the revised arrangement. And that matters, because once a royal ceremony enters final planning, changes stop feeling like suggestions and start feeling like facts. Anne's order hadn't been debated into weakness. From what we're hearing, it had simply been accepted. The silence in that room reportedly hurt more than any open challenge. Staff had been instructed to proceed without discussing the change, and that discipline created its own quiet cruelty. Nobody corrected Camilla because there was nothing left to correct. Nobody moved toward her because nobody had been given permission to rescue the moment. She saw the absence before anyone explained it. Her folder gone, her place reassigned, the ceremony rolling forward, and herself no longer inside its machinery. She reportedly asked one aide where her schedule pack had been placed, and the hesitation that followed became the answer. A few seconds, no more. But inside those seconds lived the whole truth of her new position. The aide didn't insult her. The aide didn't refuse her. The aide simply paused long enough for the Queen Consort to understand that Anne's decision had traveled far beyond a private disagreement. It had reached the desks, the briefings, the timing sheets, the people trained never to react. Charles learned soon after that the final ceremonial briefing had already gone ahead without Camilla's attendance notes included. That detail, from what we're hearing, struck him harder than he expected. A private argument could still be softened. A public correction could still be shaped. But a finalized briefing with his wife left out of it meant the palace had chosen a path. The king could feel the decision hardening around him, turning from family conflict into institutional fact. He'd wanted time. Anne had used procedure. William was quietly informed next, and his response reportedly carried its own warning. The prince didn't react with shock. He didn't demand an explanation. He paused, measured, and controlled, as though the decision confirmed something he'd already feared. Charles watched that restraint closely, because silence from William is rarely empty. It usually means judgment is forming behind it. Charles reportedly asked whether Anne had gone too far, but the question didn't land where he hoped. William chose his words with care, aware that one careless answer could turn family pain into a fight over the future. And in that careful pause, the king understood his son was no longer looking only at Camilla's absence. He was looking at what the monarchy would become if personal wounds kept shaping public duty.
That's the moment this stopped being only about Anne and Camilla. It became about the future of the crown itself. The decisive conversation came without aides, without papers, without anyone to soften the truth. Charles and William alone in a private room, father and son facing a question neither could reduce to protocol. Anne had removed a name from a parade list, but William reportedly understood the deeper matter, whether the monarchy would protect feelings or protect trust. Charles looked at his son with the exhaustion of a man carrying two loyalties that refused to coexist. He didn't ask as king first, he asked as a husband. He wanted an honest view, but he also wanted a way back. A careful route that might restore Camilla without humiliating Anne or turning the week's ceremony into a royal standoff. The prince, by these accounts, grasped the danger at once. Reversed the removal too quickly, and the crown wouldn't look compassionate, it would look divided. It would look as though ceremony could be bent by pressure after Anne had already drawn the line. William reportedly knew his aunt's authority couldn't be weakened lightly. She'd acted within the ceremonial structure. And that mattered because royal order depends on the belief that certain decisions stay steady once made. The sovereign's parade isn't a family luncheon where bruised pride gets soothed by a quiet apology. It's a public expression of discipline, loyalty, and command. If Charles overruled Anne for emotional reasons, the palace would broadcast a dangerous message that personal discomfort could outrank institutional trust. Charles spoke of Camilla's pain, and for a moment the room felt less like a royal chamber and more like a family trapped by its own history. He reportedly said she wouldn't see this as discipline, she'd see it as rejection. William didn't dismiss that. He knew the Queen Consort would feel the absence deeply, and he understood no official wording could soften what removal means. But his answer came with the calm weight of a future king. Public duty, he told Charles, sometimes requires private pain to stay private. Those words reportedly struck harder because they weren't cruel. They were true. William revealed that staff confidence had already shifted toward Anne's version of events. She had acted before the dispute could damage the parade itself, before whispers became open embarrassment, before the monarchy appeared to be managing feelings instead of command. And Charles heard the warning beneath his son's restraint. Restoring Camilla wouldn't heal the wound. it would expose it. William left the room without triumph, and Charles stayed behind with the silence he'd feared most. He didn't call Anne. He didn't reverse the order. He let the decision stand. And in that refusal to act, the direction of the entire week became clear. By then, the palace could still contain the decision, but it could no longer contain the meaning. And the outside world began to read the silence. By morning, the story had escaped the velvet walls. It was no longer a private amendment, no longer a tense exchange between royals, no longer a folded list on a polished table. It became an image the whole country could grasp in an instant. Princess Anne standing firm, Camilla absent, and the monarchy choosing order over emotional repair. Camilla reportedly learned quickly that silence travels faster than any official statement. The sovereign's parade became the center of national attention precisely because her name was missing from the guest list this week. Palace officials tried to keep their language narrow, ceremonial arrangements, careful planning, the need for focus. But restraint didn't protect her. The absence itself grew louder than any explanation, and every controlled phrase made the wound feel more deliberate. Camilla reportedly watched the coverage privately, holding her expression steady with the discipline royal life demands of those already hurting. She understood the danger at once. The public wasn't seeing an illness, a diary change, or a minor adjustment. They were seeing a message. They were seeing Anne's decision stand untouched. The Queen Consort had wanted visibility beside Charles, yet now her invisibility carried more power than any appearance could have. That was the cruel turn. Her removal had become the story. Anne, from what we're hearing, received the morning papers without any trace of triumph. She didn't celebrate. She didn't soften. The Princess Royal understood that a victory inside a family can still feel like a loss. Her decision had protected order, but it had also exposed pain. A major front page reportedly captured the whole rupture in one brutal frame. Anne in uniform beside a headline about the parade line drawn, a smaller image of Camilla from an earlier ceremony placed beneath. The country needed no long explanation. The page told them everything. Outside Buckingham Palace, a small crowd gathered by the gates, not shouting, not waving banners, just reading updates on their phones and murmuring with the strange quiet that comes when people sense history turning. Some wondered whether Anne had gone too far. Others whispered that she'd finally done what others had avoided. And that matters, because public feeling can harden palace choices. Once a nation begins reading silence as judgment, even the king cannot easily rewrite the meaning. Charles reportedly saw that truth with painful clarity. He could fight the story emotionally and risk widening the fracture, or he could accept what the decision had already declared. Camilla's absence had moved beyond private injury. Anne's firmness had become public symbolism. William's restraint had become future direction. And when the noise faded, what remained wasn't scandal. It was judgment, the kind only history delivers after the shouting stops. In the end, the most powerful statement at the sovereign's parade wasn't spoken from a podium, printed in a bulletin, or whispered by a palace aide. It was an empty place where Camilla had expected to stand. Anne's decision didn't merely remove a name, it defined a boundary, and everyone around the crown understood exactly what had changed. Camilla stayed away, but her absence entered the ceremony before any formal word could explain it. The parade moved forward with the revised list intact, and that matters because the palace had endured private pressure, emotional appeals, and public attention. Yet Anne's decision still survived. The Queen Consort could no longer frame the removal as confusion or timing. Her missing place had become the message. Charles reportedly watched the ceremony with the restraint of a man who'd lost an argument without ever raising his voice. The king carried two wounds at once: the sadness of a husband who couldn't undo the pain dealt to his wife, and the duty of a monarch who couldn't ignore why the decision had held. He knew the monarchy had presented a controlled exterior, but behind that calm lay a clear internal verdict. Ceremonial trust had to be protected, even when a personal relationship suffered. Anne didn't need to explain herself again. She'd already spoken through action, and that action grew stronger because it held under pressure. The Princess Royal had proved something the palace rarely says aloud. Closeness to the crown is not guaranteed by marriage, emotion, or expectation. It has to be supported by trust. That's why her move carried such force. She hadn't simply blocked Camilla from one event. She'd drawn a line around the ceremony itself and forced everyone else to respect it. William's silence confirmed what Charles could no longer avoid. The prince had refused to push for a reversal, and that restraint revealed the future shape of the monarchy more clearly than any statement could. He understood that fragile compromises might soothe the present, but they could weaken the institution waiting for him. The future king chose discipline over comfort, clarity over emotional repair, confidence over confusion. In doing so, he left Camilla wounded, but he left the crown steadier. And the final emotional verdict was impossible to soften. Anne's removal of Camilla from the sovereign's parade guest list marked the moment private discomfort gave way to public order. Camilla lost a place at one ceremony, but the monarchy gained a sharper boundary around what duty demands. Charles was left wounded, Anne was left vindicated, William was left steadier, and the crown emerged colder but clearer. The parade ended not in reconciliation, but in a truth no one inside the palace could deny: that in the House of Windsor, absence can speak louder than any crown.